Kia ora, kia ora, kia ora whānau. Welcome back to another edition of Big Hero News. Kia ora, Penny Ashton. My goodness, it's so lovely to see you.
I know, it's been ages. Hello.
It's been ages. Good to have you back on. How you been?
Good. I've had my dabbling with the coronavirus, the novel coronavirus, which is not that interesting anymore. It's not very novel as far as I'm concerned. But yes, I succumbed to it in Ototahi, Christchurch, my hometown. But I mean, I was with my mum, which was quite good.
Do you know how you got it? Like, did you track? Did you know what the situation was?
I think, and I'm not going to name them because...
Go on, name shame.
I think I got it at the theatre. I think I got it at the theatre when I was doing a show and I wasn't in charge of making sure people were wearing masks, and people were not wearing masks. Like over half the audience were not wearing masks. And then I got it. So it was about 24 hours later. So that would have been a really quick turnaround, but not impossible. And the only place I was without a mask for any length of time. So that's kind of annoying, but yet there was something pleasing about being at my parents' house, and my mother was a nurse.
Oh, nice.
So when I passed out twice, she caught me and rang the ambulance and stuff like that. So averted head injuries. And then I was in, she just has this room upstairs that she actually vacated. So then I had my own bathroom and a heat pump, and it was basically isolation Sheraton, basically. So, and they'd had it. Otherwise I would have been terrified I was going to kill my parents, but they'd already had it. So they could leave and bring me things. So yeah, if all cases, it was the best case.
I think your mum being a nurse or a former nurse, as if like dad had been a chef, that would have been perfect. But you know,
he was not. No, I had a lot of homemade sort of meals and things upstairs and stuff. It was a bit shit though, because my sister was visiting and I was supposed to be sort of catching up with her kids because they live overseas now, except we were all in the same house but separate. So that was a bit shit. Bad.
I've said this before and I'll say it again. The person who so far has won COVID lockdown is AJ Hackett. When the first time it happened, I did a podcast with him. When the first time it happened, like in 2020, he went to, quote, one of our resorts and stayed there for 3 months, fixing it up and hanging out with his family with no customers. And that's where he spent his first lockdown. So no matter what happens, AJ Hackett won. He won COVID, whatever it was.
Yeah. But this was not bad.
Yeah, I was going to say though as well, I've been having this conversation the last couple of days and we're not talking about COVID tonight, but just because we've brought it up, it's frustrating me a little bit because what I feel like is there's some evidence out of, I read it in the conversation the other day out of, I think, Denmark and Qatar, that if you've had COVID, it's quite good protection against BA5. So at the moment, reinfections are quite a small percentage of the overall cases, which actually means people like me who haven't had it yet through a mixture of good luck and good management, you know, but there's certainly luck in there as well.
Yeah.
We should be doing everything we can in society to protect me and protect people who haven't had it, because that's how we get rid of it. Because if people who have had it are, and I'll say more protected, because you're not protected, but more protected, they're less likely to get it. So if we can look after the people who haven't had it just in this period, we're going to continue to see those numbers come down, because that's the people who are getting it right now. I just want to put that out there, saying just remember those people who haven't had it. And I'm not saying like look after me. I'm saying masks out there, you know, looking after these people who haven't had it. That's how we're going to see the tail end of this.
I know.
Unless, of course, BA6 turns up and it's worse, but who knows?
And masks are so easy. I went to Rarotonga last week and there was not a mask anywhere, which was like, because my husband still hasn't had it. So I was going into shops. And when I arrived at the airport, this woman said, when I was waiting for the transfer, she said, "You can take your mask off now." And I was like, I'm all right, before I get in a bus, you know? So it was like really interesting to be in different places. I know Australia is very chill, but yeah, I'm just like, I'm happy that there's still a lot of mask wearing, but I just wish people that were going to the theatre thought about the people that were on stage trying to make a living.
Okay, let's jump into this. We've got kind of three things to talk about tonight. A bit later on, we'll talk about how the alt-right snowflakes don't seem to like Maori chocolate. For some reason, the big, tough alt-right people are triggered by someone using a Maori word, you know.
All
We're going to have a look at Jacinda Ardern's press conference today, because, again, some of those same people on the right have been playing a game of, equal and opposite. Uffindell was this, and now, in Labour, it's exactly the same thing. It's exactly the same thing. And I think we want to investigate that first. And if I'm being fair, say investigate it, you make up your own mind. But I've got several clips from the press conference. In the news, you would have seen 1 or 2. I've got 6 or 7, just to spell out exactly what was said, and then people can decide for themselves if they think it's a, same, or if one's a very different scenario from the other. But first, where we're going to start is something that I saw on Twitter this morning from the Green Party. And so joining us to have that conversation is Green Party MP, Anne Genter. Hey, Anne.
Kia ora.
Kia ora.
Good to have you on again, and thank you for joining us today, live as well. So whilst we haven't got you for a huge amount of time, because you've got things like babies, which are very important to children to not get exhausted for. If people have a specific question, maybe we can talk for 5 or 10 minutes and then see if anyone wants to ask anything. They can knock it out now. There's already a couple of comments in there because I've teased what we're going to be talking about. So let's have a look at the conversation that I saw this morning on Twitter, coming out from the Green Party of Aotearoa, New Zealand. Breaking the Human Rights Commission. I don't think that's quite how you're supposed to say it. Breaking news. The Human Rights Commission has
recommended. That's what the Ash Party wants to do. Break.
Okay, yeah, true. Breaking. The Human Rights Commission has recommended an immediate rent freeze in New Zealand, echoing our call from earlier this year. Choosing between paying exorbitant rent dollars or kai for the whānau, for the family, shouldn't be the reality for many, but it is. Sign our open letter to the PM right now. And then there was a further press release was this morning as well, posted by Marama, that reads, the Green Party backs the Human Rights Commission's call for an immediate rent freeze, followed by reform of the rental system to guarantee that everyone has a warm, dry, affordable place to live. We'll come back to those words in a second. The Human Rights Commission is absolutely right. I guess this is from Marama. An immediate rent freeze followed by permanent and meaningful changes to the way we rent is essential for recognising the human right to a warm, affordable house, says Marama. A home is a home whether someone rents or owns it, but for 1 in 3 people who rent, the cost of staying in their home is rising much faster than incomes. So that went out this morning. And I would like to, I guess, open the floor for you, Julianne, to first of all, maybe expand on that. Tell us anything else, what this is all about, why this is necessary. The floor is yours.
Well, the government did a rent freeze in 2020. When COVID hit and we went into lockdown, they did a rent freeze, which meant that landlords couldn't put up the rent, basically, for a period of time. And it went beyond the first lockdown. So it's entirely possible to do this. And we are in a situation where there's a massive problem with cost of living going up, and rents are going up faster than inflation, faster than incomes. And that's why it's so great the Human Rights Commission has done this work. It's fantastic to have an independent body doing the work and calling for these sorts of changes. We put out a policy paper in March this year, which was more specific about that we should have an immediate rent freeze, like the government did in 2020. And we do that until 2 things. We can put in place other changes to renting, reforming that system, and while we're increasing the supply of rental housing. So the other 2 things we thought were really important policy tools is a limit on annual rent increases. And so that basically is saying, if you're going to put up a rent, someone's rent in a year, it should be the lower of either the rate of inflation excluding rents or the rate of growth of the median hourly wage, less 1 percentage point. That sounds kind of technical, jargony, but basically there's options for how you set rent increases, and you say landlords aren't allowed to put up the rent more than general inflation is going up, excluding rents, or around the same rate as the growth in median hourly wages, a little bit less. And then the third thing is linking rents to what previous tenants paid, because you want to get rid of that incentive where they might boot out the tenants or the tenants leave and then they massively put up the rent. So these are really practical policies that would help control the growth of rents over time, and would link it to what people are paid or what inflation is doing, so that we're sure that we're keeping it reasonable. Sorry, you probably have some questions. I should probably stop there. But I mean, like, ultimately, there's no reason why government can't do this. There's just no reason. And there are like some economists, and I saw Eric Crampton tweeting about this in some survey of economists. Do you think rent controls have improved the supply of affordable housing and affordable rental properties? And most of the economists were saying no. And I mean, I don't need to tell you, this was a very undiverse group of people. I knew a bunch of them that were, pointing out, and there was something in kind of general economic theory that was like, oh, rent controls are broken. It's a bad way to manage the issue. You should do it this other way. But I think the evidence and data on that actually in recent years is not clear cut. No, I'm not saying it's not the only thing you do. And one of the key things that could be harmful is if you don't have other policies to increase the supply of publicly provided housing and rental housing, then in the absence of anything else, rent controls are really good for the people who are living somewhere when they get the apartments. But then maybe for new people moving into the area over time, it becomes harder and harder to get. And, and then they end up paying a fortune, like, in some cities, like maybe San Francisco would be an example of a rent control policy that hasn't worked. But that's also because they're so horribly NIMBY in San Francisco that, and you've got the whole problem with, the tech sector just being awash in way too much capital, and that driving up prices. But I mean, San Francisco really has not increased supply in the way that many other cities have done, and it should have. And that's because it was, sort of like, you can't build anything here. We're freezing the city in a moment in time. So, so practical policy is totally achievable, and I think very fair. But ultimately, we do want a much bigger role for the public sector, whether that's local government, iwi, community trust sort of thing, or central government, in the supply of public housing. And you just have to guarantee an affordable place for people to live in the place they want to live. We can do that as a society. I know it's stupid not to.
Yeah. I guess the big question for all of us is, how do you enforce it? I mean, how do you force a landlord not to increase the rent between tenants? Or like, how do you stop a private citizen who owns a home, who has tenants coming in, not to increase the rent? How does that work? Well,
I mean, they were able to do it. I think you've got a tenancy tribunal. I'm not sure. One of the ideas we floated, and I don't know if the government has actually picked this up, but is having a kind of advocacy organization that's publicly funded, that's on hand for renters to be able to take things to tenancy tribunal, and basically just leave it up to the tenants to make complaints. And the landlord has to be able, they have to have records. They have records of what they've been charging for rent. And they have to declare this stuff, obviously when they're paying taxes and things. It's all part of the being a landlord. You sign an agreement with the tenant, and it says what your rent is. And so there is that record. So I don't think it would be that hard to enforce.
I mean, I was just reading a news story today. There's something like 1,000 landlords hadn't lodged the bonds with the tribunal. So, they're already not doing what they're supposed to do. So some governance of that would be quite tricky. But yeah, I mean, for me, the only question I have is that you say until we increase supply and things like that, but that's not going to be for a long time.
Yeah.
Like, you want to freeze the rents until that point? Like, that feels a little unrealistic.
No, I mean, we definitely think there's a case right now because we know there's a gap between supply and demand. And in that time, you don't want rents to just keep skyrocketing. So
what's the end point?
But initially, actually, in our paper, we just said freeze rents until you've got these other limits in place and the rest of the framework. And you need to ensure that you're continuing to increase the supply. And I would say, government's going as hard as it can on that at the moment, but it's probably not the perfect institutional framework for increasing supply over time. And it's a really difficult time to do it as well. Ideally, we would have had a big publicly funded state home public housing build in the aftermath of the GFC, when all of these builders were going under and we needed economic and fiscal stimulus. That would have been a time. And so, during that time, a lot of things did not get built because National was ideologically opposed to public housing. And by the time they sort of got onto it, it was already starting to pick up again. So when there were policies like Kiwi Build, it really didn't work at a time when the market was already kind of, maxed out. And now we're sort of running into problems because there's all this demand for building. And government is exacerbating that by trying to build a lot of houses really fast, but we have to do it. But counter-cyclical building would be better.
And it's just so tricky too, because I know I am incredibly lucky to be able to own this home, but I have only just done that. So for my whole life, I have rented. And so, a lot of people sort of attack landlords a lot of the time, but we still need them, obviously. And that's the thing, we need so many people to actually be renting from these people. And they've had inflationary pressures and stuff like that as well. So, and that's really big currently for everybody. I really like the idea of tying it to inflation. To me, that makes perfect sense. You know what I mean? Like, that's what we're all facing. That's all the costs we're facing together. To me, that makes perfect sense. And to me, it's good to bring this in after we've had the healthy homes initiatives, etc. Like, they've had deadlines to get to things, because they've spent the money, and that they could make tax deductible those spending the money to make that retrograde the houses, all that sort of stuff. So then from here on in, it's about the linking to inflation, whereas they should be healthy. So I don't know what you've talked about in the past. If you've talked about things that are you not on board with the Healthy Homes Initiative, Pat Brittenden?
No, it's not that at all. I mean, are you talking about what Julianne and I have talked about in the past?
Yes.
I run another thing which I started off at the end of last year, relaunched, called Elephant TV. And we did a debate, and it was affordable quality housing is a right. I was the moderator, so I was the host. It was my platform. And there was a property investor at one side who was a lovely guy. And I think him and Julianne got on quite well and had some points of agreement in some places. And Julianne coming on to talk on behalf of that, because the affordable quality household is right. That's why I said the phrasing of this, I understand. Not understand necessarily, but I see it in another green policy. So that was what it was more about. But look, I do have a question, and I'm not a landlord, but I think about what others will be thinking and asking. So tomorrow the OCR is due to go up by 50 basis points. Yeah, that means someone who's got $600,000 mortgage is going to be paying an extra $60 a week. How do you? Because I mean, this is actually based on what you said, Penny, about increasing supply. If it became unaffordable for a landlord to own a house, is there any danger in rental freezes that this could do the opposite? If a landlord tomorrow has his mortgage go up by 60, 80, $100 a week, and there's a rental freeze, is the expectation just that person will eat it? Or, I guess I'm wondering when the numbers don't quite look. And there was a story a few weeks ago that says at the moment it's the most expensive in 65 years to get into a house because of the cost of houses and the cost of rates. So I'm wondering about that.
Add to that as well the fact that you can't claim interest anymore. So that's another added expense not on new builds, but on existing building. So that's another expense that's quite new as well. So yes.
So if there is an increase in the landlord's cost, would the expectation just be that they eat it in this, Julianne, or how does that work?
Well, they would be, because the increase would be linked somewhat to inflation, and inflation is somewhat linked to interest rates. There would be that relationship there to some, and I think, ultimately we do want to get away from heavily leveraged landlords that only own one or two properties and who are just, making a loss in order to get the tax-free capital gains later. And of course, unfortunately, all the incentives personally, like for your personal wealth, up until very recently, were buy property, and we need to change that, because it's not good for our society. It's not fair, and so that started to change, and that's why they got rid of the interest deductibility on investment property. We don't have interest deductibility on our homes. So why would you, it doesn't make sense that you're giving that sort of incentive to people to own investment properties. And I think ultimately, there's going to have to be this shift. And maybe what would happen is people would get out of their investment property because they couldn't afford, they really couldn't afford it at that point. But
when you say get out, do you mean the landlords would get out of the investment properties? Is that what you mean?
Yeah, and sell.
But then what happens to that tenant who needs the house? Yeah.
I mean, what should happen is that then the price of buying homes reduces quite a lot. And so a lot of people are renting who want to buy a home can afford to buy a home. So, the issue with supply and demand is really about just like the number of people who need to live somewhere and the number of homes. And it kind of doesn't, it'll move around because there are people who might want to be long-term renters, but there's a whole lot of people renting because they can't afford to buy. And so if there's people selling rental properties because they can't afford to keep being a landlord, then the price starts to come down of people buying homes, because there aren't all those people who already had capital, who were the people who owned lots of houses, and it was easier for them to buy another house than the first home buyer.
Right.
So suddenly the market becomes more the market. More homes are available and affordable for first home buyers. So it does work in that sense. Now, the issue that Penny brought up about there will be people who want to rent, and creating a kind of environment that is secure and attractive for long-term renters to make a place a home is something that we absolutely support and want to do. And ultimately, you really want to do that with more like institutional landlords. They are better landlords. They're much more predictably good landlords. If you have good regulation. If you have good regulation and you have a good legal environment for, in other countries, that is much better than you randomly have, someone who owns one or two properties, and they can't really be, some of them are really nice and generous, and some of them are like, I'm going to wait to the last possible minute for complying with a healthy home standard. And no, I'm not going to show up when your shower's broken. And actually you need, it's very hit and miss. And I think you are much better off if you have professional landlords, which may be not for profit, and maybe that would be better. Not for profit, community sector, or government. City councils can be quite good landlords.
Yeah, like my father's had flats the whole time, and he's good. He gives them presents. He does. He gives his tenants Christmas presents, and he put heat pumps in decades ago and all this sort of stuff, which was incredible. Whereas my landlord only put a heat pump in our flat after we had left and he was trying to sell it. He only put insulation in at the last minute. And I was like, it was about a year in advance, because I sent him an email going, are you going to wait until the deadline, because it's freezing in this house? It's fucking freezing, excuse me. So he was a bit like that. But I was reading about Germany, because I was looking at some tweets earlier, right? And there's people like, oh, it's failed in Germany, and because Berlin brought in a rent freeze, and it has just been overturned, but that was because the central government decided that the state government didn't have the authority to do that. It wasn't because it's a failed experiment or anything like that. But one of the main people that are driving behind it is there's this huge one, I think it's called Deutsche Wohner, which means live, where people are very unhappy. It's a huge institutional landlord, and they're very unhappy with them and think that they are not great. So, there's always exceptions, and when, because Germany is so about renting. Germany's all about renting.
What about, I mean, I'm not poo-pooing this idea, but what about, it seems like the gap is maybe there's no real harsh penalties at the moment for landlords. They get away with anything. What about beefing up like the tenancy tribunal and what they can do, not having this massive, big, long, drawn out situation that takes 6 months to sort anything out? And like, because what Penny said, we've had this conversation. In fact, we probably had it in that debate. I talked about France as well. And the idea that I said in that debate we had was, it feels to me a bit improbable to think we can fix the housing market because of prices and demand, but it doesn't feel improbable that we can fix the rental market. And looking to places like France or Germany, what they're doing there, and giving people the opportunity to rent for life if they want to, and having some security around there, seems to me like a more achievable outcome for giving people home security, securities in their home, than perhaps hoping that the 1 or 2 mums will get out of it, mum and dad, landlords will get out of it. Then the prices might drop, and because if it's a good rental property and the prices are dropping, then what's not to say just all the big owners just won't, pick it up and then buy it off them. We can't force them not to be landlords unless we can, rather than the local body or the central government becoming the landlords. So this seems again to be a conversation floating around. Why don't we just fix up the renting rules and then protect the renters more and give them the out that way? Maybe this is a part of what you're saying, but it feels like there needs to be some teeth there as well for those bad landlords, as well as perhaps some help with the rental.
Definitely want more teeth and actual consequences. And it would be great to get some of those property managers to be regulated, and they're a pretty toxic part of the mix as well, because sometimes you have good people who would be good landlords, but they've outsourced it to this property management company, which is then horrific, and often telling them, I had friends who their property management companies were telling them, oh, you don't need to invest in the insulation now, it's not until 2021 or whatever, so don't do it now. And my friend was like, but you've told me it's not up to standard and the people are cold. I want to do it now. I don't want them to be cold over the winter. But lots of people won't have that, they'll just do what the property management company says, which is, pay as little as possible, wait as long as possible before improving things for your tenants.
Yeah. Whereas I
I think Penny might have frozen. I thought Penny was thinking for a second, but no, I think she might have actually frozen. While she's frozen, let me ask you something, Julie. Thank you for coming on and talking to us about this.
I'm sorry, I can keep coughing.
No, look, I hope you guys are okay. I know Penny had a bit of a cough there.
I know. I don't actually. I'm fine. But
there we go. Penny's back. You're back. Yeah. You froze up for a period of time, but you're back again.
Right.
I won't interrupt your question. You go.
Oh, I was just going to say, so the thing that he did that was amazing in that whole time we lived there for 9 years is he put the rent up $40 in 9 years. Oh. So, and that is phenomenal. And it's what he said. I was never greedy. I'm like, no, you weren't, but we were freezing and we would have been happy to pay a little bit more to not be freezing. Like it was, you could see your breath inside, and there was just a wood burner, which is fine at night. And the whole place got heated up massively. But at 7 o'clock in the morning, you could see your breath inside. And the bathrooms had louvered windows that didn't close properly. So, and it was a gouger. So that I will give him absolute credit for that. And he was a nice guy.
Was this in Auckland?
Yeah.
Dude, moved to Dunedin. Yeah, I reckon you want to know cold.
My first place in Christchurch was freezing. It was I just remember that chill in my bones. Yeah.
Hey, Julianne, thanks for joining us to talk about this. If we can have you for another 60 seconds, how's the leadership situation going in the Grange at the moment? It seems like it was pretty big news 2 or 3 weeks ago, but that's still not sorted out yet. We're still finding out who's going to be Marama's co-leader. Is that the case at the moment?
Well, the only candidate is James Shaw.
But correct me if I'm wrong, because we were trying to figure this out on the show. You can have that, has to be 75% approval for someone to continue on. But now if there's 51% approval, is that enough for James? Or does it have to be 75% again?
He does
or it reopens the nomination?
Yeah. He does have to get 75%. And I guess one of the key things that probably wasn't communicated very well, even to members of the party, was that there was many fewer votes than there could have been. So normally at a conference, you had 150 delegate places. And last year, when it was a contested co-leadership as thing, there was 140 delegate votes cast.
Wow.
And at this one, and I think this is because of COVID being in the community and people, kind of not wanting to attend an AGM in person. In the end, it was online, but it didn't get moved online until 4 days before the AGM. And so they were struggling to get people to be delegates from around the country, and there were only 107 delegates attended and voted. So that was quite a big drop, 107 out of 150. So it was more votes not cast than votes reopen nominations against James. And presumably most of those delegate votes, if they probably would not have been reopen nominations, because my guess, I can't say for sure, but my guess is that people who are happy with the leadership weren't motivated to show up and vote in this election because they didn't think they had to, So it's not, I mean, he still has to run a campaign and convince members to vote for him and to get 75%. But there were also changes to the delegate rules that were made at this AGM. So it's actually a different distribution of delegates now, because previously the way our delegate rules worked, some parts of the country that had lots of members and lots of electorates had lots of delegates, and other parts of the country that had lots of members but not so many electorates, like they were concentrated, lots of members concentrated in a few electorates, only had a few delegates. So arguably, you know, it's going to be different. It's going to be a different set of delegates, and there'll be different people who turn out to the meetings, and maybe James will convince some of the people who voted reopen nominations, or maybe a lot more members will just show up and say, we want James to continue. I mean, if they could vote, if they voted reopen nominations again, I think that would definitely be a sign that, you know, that James should stand down. But I don't expect that to be the outcome. And I think the people who did vote reopen nominations wanted a contest and wanted someone to stand against him. But
so your expectation is James will be the leader, the co-leader. That's yes. Your expectation, because I'm from the outside looking in. The idea that, like, I understand we had a debate on this here with George, and I was like, how can 30% of the people stop this happening? And George was like, well, no, 30% of the people voting has enabled something to happen, which is the nomination to be opened. So I'm like, I can see how that works. But now that there is only one nominee, if those 30% come at the same vote, it does feel like they'll be stopping something, which feels a bit peculiar. But then maybe I don't have the green mindset of, you know, making sure everyone's on board or whatever it is that could possibly happen. And I just feel like it would be a bigger waste of your time and resources for the Greens in particular to then spend X amount of weeks and months looking for another co-leader. And then that might happen again next year. I'm just like, oh, anyway, just
well, and I don't know that people thought their reopen nominations were going to be successful. There might be some people who assumed it was just sending a signal and not that it would actually get over 25%. And again, it was 30%, but it was 30% of way fewer votes than what would normally be. So, and I think that if it had been 140 votes or 150 votes, and it's still been 30% reopen nominations, and we had really felt like, whoa, there's significant, like, you know, I think, you know, maybe James would have thought twice before putting his name forward again. I don't know. I probably shouldn't speculate on this.
Yeah.
But there was enough of a question about whether or not this was really representative of how the members felt, or whether it was just that group was the people who were dissatisfied and concerned were overrepresented in the sample of delegates and the members showing up at branch meetings. And so now we'll see. And
yeah. All right. Hey, look, Julianne, thank you very much for coming in. We'll let you go because you've got more important things to do than talk to us.
Really nice talking to you both.
Yeah, appreciate your time, and looking forward to seeing, I guess, what you guys end up continuing on with this rent freeze, and where you keep going with your housing policies, I guess, in the next 12 months, isn't it, till the next election?
Yep, it's getting close.
All right. Thanks, Julianne.
Cheers.
See you later.
There you go. All right, Penny, that's us. Do you want to add anything to that? This idea of, I guess I don't quite get. I can get 30% causing the nominations to be opened. But then it feels like at that point, now that the nominations are there, it should be 51%. And I'm not a part of the Greens, so it's their business, but it feels like once you're actually voting, it should be 51%.
Yeah, and I'm a Greens voter, and it just feels like it destabilizes the way that they appear to the rest of the voting public. You know, it undermines their cohesion. I like James Shaw. I think he seems somebody who is actually able to compromise, because you have to compromise when you're in government. Some people hate that, and there's a lot of uber left, you know, just staunch, never give an inch people that are in the Green Party or have been in the Green Party past, who are still very vocal about things. But that doesn't actually get you anywhere. To get a seat at the table, you have to be prepared to do things, and I think he has. So anyway.
And the thing it can possibly do, and will possibly do, is it will give national ammunition to go, well, you can't trust the Greens in partnership with Labour. They can't even sort out their leadership. You know, how are they going to help? It shows instability.
And sort of opens the door for that teal sort of thing that, you know, it went off in Australia with the whole right wing, but also environmental, that sort of way, like right way fiscally, but environmentally. Anyway, because that's always been something. There's a lot of people out there that feel that the Greens are too social policy and linked, you know, with the environment. I'm somebody that supports that, but obviously some people don't. So, you know, anyway.
Let's have a look at some comments that were coming in. I'm sorry we didn't put these out while Julianne was there, but, you know, she's got a young child and she needed, I didn't want to hold her any longer. But some people, David says, given all the talk and strangely similar rental prices increases across the board, it is time for the Commerce Commission to do a similar investigation into rental prices as is done with supermarkets. I think I really struggle with this idea because supermarkets are companies. There's various rules and stuff under it, whereas, you know, private, like I think about Dunedin, some of the worst looking and perhaps worst quality houses in Dunedin are some of the ones that are highest for rent because they're in the student sector.
Yeah.
Like what do they do? And I'm not saying this, like I'm not landlords. I'm not kind of fighting on behalf of the landlords and ratepayers, but I'm just wondering how that is done. And I can't compare it to another goods or service because housing is a non-essential. You have to have it. But yeah, I guess I wonder how they can enforce
we
it.
already have rules in place for flats. They're supposed to have extractor fans. They're supposed to have a heating source, all that stuff. So there are already laws in place. And I think it's true that we need some more teeth to get some of these fucking landlords, particularly in Dunedin, those student slum landlords, just to pull their socks up. It's just horrendous how freezing people are in Dunedin. I mean, it was a rite of passage. Like all of my friends that went to Dunedin were always freezing and they shouldn't have to be.
Yeah, no, I agree. There's this idiotic sort of vibe in Dunedin where people, for some reason, they're proud to tell you that they grew up with the ice on the inside of their windows when they woke up in the morning. I'm like, well, you had fucking terrible parents, and didn't you?
Yeah.
But now, yeah, there is that vibe about it. There is that vibe.
And the 40s and stuff. But yeah, right. Mm-hmm.
Let's have a look at the Prime Minister. Now, this is actually a clip from yesterday. We're going to go into the conversation around the press conference today primarily and what has happened with Dr. Sharma. But what I wanted to do is just give a bit of because the media, some in the media and certainly some on the right are both sidesing this. They're saying, oh, look, Uffindell, oh, look, Sharma, same. And I just wanted to give a little example, and this is not from today, it's from yesterday, so it was before the caucus meeting, about what was happening. This is from the AM show, with the Prime Minister kind of being told, why aren't you doing what National did? Just as an example of the both sidesing that I'm talking about.
With issues such as this, we will always look to refine our processes. We will always look to reflect on the way that we are conducting ourselves, because we do have to be to the highest standard.
Okay, so if you are looking into those issues, then does that mean you're going,
because they are in charge?
Does that mean you are going to stand down these ministers in question while you carry out that review, just as the National Party have stood down Sam Uffindell while they look into allegations?
If I may, this comes back to the fact that there were accusations made by staff members around the conduct of an MP.
That's about all I want to show you from there, just to give you an idea of the both sidesing that's been going on, I guess, since last weekend. Now, we're going to go through, have you seen the press conference, Penny, or is this news for you?
No, but I read it.
Yeah, okay. So we're going to go through several clips here. A couple of clips from the actual conversation or the press conference that the Prime Minister put out, and then a couple of clips from the Q&A. I'll play a clip, give you a chance to respond and jump in if you want, Penny. And if there's nothing you want to say or I want to say, we will just continue on and go through them. Because what I want to do is say, should the Prime Minister, should Labour be doing the same as what National did? Should they have done it sooner, or is this a different scenario? That's one of the things I sort of want to investigate. So this very first part of the press conference, it's just like 20 seconds. It's just saying it's just the decision, really. This is the first thing that she said when she came out about the decision that's just been made.
The Labour Party caucus met this afternoon and has decided to suspend Gaurav Sharma from our caucus effective immediately. Unfortunately, despite numerous attempts to engage Gaurav, he decided not to attend this afternoon's meeting.
So that's the first one. All right. Second clip is between these two clips, the Prime Minister talked about there was a path back, a way and a path back, and then the Prime Minister gave a bit of a timeline as to the events leading to this point.
Yeah.
A very quick summation of those issues based on the documents that I have reviewed. Early last year, the Labour Whip's office and Parliamentary Service began working with Gaurav to address concerns raised about his staff management. But before new staff were brought on board, Gaurav was asked to work with a mentor to help remedy issues. Gaurav objected to this intervention. Finally, agreement was reached at the end of last year. Further issues were later raised by additional staff members, including those in his direct employment. This resulted in another pause on hiring and again offers of coaching, mentoring, and temporary staff in the meantime. Gaurav again objected to this intervention and the need for his future hiring of staff to be linked to any actions or undertakings on his part. A protracted process ensued.
I have one more clip from the actual press conference, and then we've got some Q&A from the journalists that were there. I thought this clip was particularly interesting because in this clip, the Prime Minister talks about the difference in how, I guess, they and Dr. Sharma sees the situation. She says that there are very different views of the same agreed on facts. So the way the Prime Minister is saying it is that we all agree on the facts. One party or one side is saying this is what it means. Dr. Sharma is saying this is what it means. And I thought that was quite an interesting thing because it looks like they're not in disagreement about what the facts of the issue are, more so what that means, perhaps.
My third observation is that I've seen nothing to substantiate the claims and allegations of mismanagement and bullying that have been made by Gaurav. And it would be unfair to frame genuine efforts around performance management in this way. While the concerns of staff have become obscured in recent days, they remain a concern for me. And that is why the team were working with Gaurav in the first place. Gaurav has a very different view of what are essentially, though, the same and agreed facts. In my view, that requires mediation rather than a determination. Caucus resolved today to do what any workplace would do under these circumstances, and that is to provide a mediation process for these issues to be resolved. That is, in my view, the most appropriate opportunity to raise any grievances on either side between Gaurav and the Labour Whips.
So there you go. There's a few clips from the thing. Any thoughts around what you've heard, Penny?
I mean, to me, it just feels like it was a employment dispute. I mean, 4 people have come out now to say that he was bullying them in his office, and there's been no substantive evidence from the other side. So to me, it just feels like somebody was being called on their behavior and has lashed out in response. Obviously, I am a Labour supporter, so I don't think I'm being, I always try to think that I'm never just completely blind one way or the other. But yeah, I mean, until there's more people complaining about various things apart from this aggrieved person, then I find it hard to have much sympathy for him.
Yeah, some of the questions that come up from the journalists are really good. Obviously, that's their job. But they really expand on, like, there are some things that the Prime Minister had a pre-prepared conversation, but she went into quite a lot of detail in the Q&A section of it, which we're going to get into at the moment. There are people who are like, there is a particular person who on Twitter yesterday was talking about, and still today actually, talking about how the Prime Minister's been gaslighting Dr. Sharma the whole time. And 2 or 3 times I've been going, just can you specifically identify just tell me where the gaslighting is. Gaslighting means you basically fool someone into thinking that what they believe to be wrong. And that's what gaslighting is, right? It's a psychological torture almost for you to basically convince them that their correct thought is incorrect. So, I mean, we all use terms sometimes that aren't what the definition is, but it's been a term used several times by some on the right to say that, the Prime Minister has come out, accused someone of bullying and then bullied them by getting rid of them, which to me doesn't feel like the case. I don't know if I've got the clip that I'm going to play, but there's one part of it where they talk about, there's a way back for Gaurav, and one of I do have it. I know I've got it. Because one of the in fact, it's the first question, so I'll play it. A journalist asked the question: is leaving the door open an acknowledgement to some wrong by the party? In other words, if you guys saying he can come back, is that you guys covering your asses in case you get proven to be wrong? To which the Prime Minister is very clear.
No, that's an acknowledgement that the caucus team see themselves as just that, a team. They are very hurt and upset by what has happened, but they are also a very forgiving group of people. They want to give the opportunity for their team member to form a path back, but they're also very clear the breaches here do constitute serious misconduct. If there are further breaches, they reserve the right to revisit the decision.
So that's a pretty good statement. Now, I guess I got to be. I mean, I believe the Prime Minister, but to be fair, I'd kind of say whether it's right or wrong, that answer in that press conference was very good. It was a very good answer because it basically said we're having compassion here, because she does say at another point, and I definitely haven't got this clip, that with the breaches there are grounds for expulsion. So they could have got rid of him today.
It's egregious what he's been doing, absolutely. And it's like just willingly trying to drag them down, which, considering you just ran to be elected into this party, it just feels such bizarre behavior. And to me, it really does, when people start to flail, they start to lash out and see what the writing on the wall. And that's what it feels like to me.
Yep. Let's play a couple more clips. And then if anyone wants to, I'm not watching I apologize, I'm not watching much of the comments at the moment because I'm operating a different computer. But if you want to put some comments in there, we'll try and get to some of those as we go along as well. So what happened next was there was a conversation this morning by Dr. Sharma where he put out a message saying there was a secret caucus meeting last night. And they made their decision last night, and today is just theatre. I'm paraphrasing. To which I tweeted out and said something like, well, there are ministers with aides and calendars and public appearances, so we'll know whether that's a true statement or not based on, 60 people and where they were. Now, what we found out from the Prime Minister today was there was a meeting last night, but it was a casual meeting. And the reason for the meeting why Dr. Sharma wasn't there, if true, is heinous, right? And if you're not sure what it is, you'll get to it. So this is a little bit about the Prime Minister talking about the quote unquote secret meeting. Yeah, it wasn't a secret meeting, but the casual meeting that some in the Labour Party got together and had last night.
No, look, happy to be very clear on that. One of the concerns raised by my team members was that, of course, caucus relies on the ability of people to speak freely and openly. One of the issues of misconduct was that, unfortunately, Gaurav had been sharing the contents of meetings publicly, and that meant people didn't feel they were able to raise questions, discuss issues with colleagues. To be very clear, when caucus members, team members came together, I made it very clear a formal caucus meeting must always be open to all caucus members. That meeting was not a formal meeting, and I was also clear we would not have any predetermined outcome. Natural justice is very important to our team. Sorry? Did you attend that? I did indeed. I did indeed. And it was convened in response to concerns, as I imagine any leader of a team would, that people didn't feel they could speak openly because meeting content was being shared. They had questions and issues they wished to discuss, but we were clear that was not a meeting to predetermine the outcome. That would not be a fair process.
Now, if that's true, and I guess I've got no reason not to believe it, that is devastating. That someone within the caucus was taking information from caucus meetings and sharing it publicly, and that's the reason that they wanted to meet privately in an unofficial get-together meeting, which didn't involve him. That point right there, if true, if proven true, if we accept as true, is devastating to anyone. Just imagine you in your own workplace. If you're a teacher, and some of the private conversations from your staff meeting then started to get shared around and publicized. It's a devastating thing for anyone within a workplace to be accused of and have done.
I mean, that's all all the National Party did, right? They were leaking like sieves. It was devastating every fucking day with them. So yeah, I mean, to me, that makes perfect sense. He's leaking shit left, right, and center. So why would you involve him necessarily in a strategic situation where he's obviously been misbehaving? It seems to me. Anyway.
Yeah. A little clip here talking about the meeting, the official caucus meeting they had today.
The meeting today had everyone who was in New Zealand and who would usually attend caucus. So usually, of course, we wouldn't have the speaker attend, and we had one member overseas, but otherwise...
The allegations he's made, don't you think he should have been given due process and then be inquired into?
So, of course, part of our process includes having a full meeting which the member is invited to attend in order to put their perspective. The time that we chose was based on his advice and when he was available. He knew the time. If I might just, he was advised of the time because he helped select it before any other member of caucus was. He was then emailed, phoned, text messaged to try and seek for him to join this meeting. We saw it as an important part of the process. The second issue, my view here is that the facts here aren't in dispute. There's different interpretations around, in some cases, the way this issue has been managed. This is not an issue that requires a determination. It requires mediation, because that's what will take us forward.
There you go. I've got one more clip, Penny, but do you want to jump on it? Like, that's, again, devastating. If the facts aren't in dispute, devastating. Devastating if true.
Just the fact he didn't show up is reeks of absolute arrogance.
There's another part, and it might be a part of this one here, but the Prime Minister during the press conference went through how they tried to contact him, and they talked and goes through a list of, like, I don't know, it felt like 8 or 9 or 10 different ways they tried to connect with him.
You just said that then.
Yeah, well, that was a short one, but there's a longer, more extensive list at another stage. So this last clip we're going to play from it was talking again about the timing for the meeting. I think she talks again about it here. How was the timing for the meeting set up? One journalist asked.
Originally, a range of options were sent, and they didn't receive a response. They then proposed a time. They were told that no, at that time Gaurav had a specific event. They then advised that we would set the meeting time at a time that suited Gaurav today. He advised that nearer to 3 would suit. So Whip suggested 2:30. We then at that point didn't receive any further engagement.
So there you go.
Right. Yeah.
So Penny, you hearing a bit more detail now, because I'm a geek and I like to get a whole lot of clips. Does this feel like anything like comparing it to Uffindell? What are your vibes?
It's so different. Like, they're just such different issues. One shows a lack of respect for their party and a lack of respect for employment process, it feels like, and has been acted on really quickly. Another shows a lack of care over selection of candidates, over trying to pull the wool over the eyes of the leader of the fucking party, as if to say, oh, he didn't know about it, which makes it fine. It doesn't. And I mean, I do think there should be paths open to redemption, but just the amount of things that are piling up with Mr. Uffindell when it comes to politics that are very poor. It feels like it was very poor judgment, but they've stood him down, and, now they've excluded him from the party. They've expelled him from the party. That was very quick. They haven't done that with Sam Uffindell.
No one's expelled from any parties, I don't think, yet. I mean, I think Dr. Sharma has been removed from caucus. He's still the local MP. He's still part of Labour, and they're saying
remove him from that, can they? Like, he can be an independent MP.
Yes. So what happens is, if they're going to revisit the decision in December, although they reserve the right to revisit it anytime they want. So, for example, if he continues to breach whatever their code of ethics are, then they could revisit it next week if they wanted to and eject him from the party. And then he'd be an independent. So
then Sam has been stood down from being I'm like, how does that work? So they're going to have another by-election?
No, he's still part of National. He's been stood down, but it's like he's on a naughty step. He's just on the naughty step.
So is he not in caucus anymore?
I guess being stood down the way. I guess the Prime Minister has explained better the exact details, but I'm assuming now that means he's no longer actively participating in National Party politics, but he is still the National Party MP for Tauranga.
So then, I mean, there seems like a semantic difference to the same sort of situation. I don't know.
Maybe. Yeah. Some people have been writing, and Carl says there's no way back for Sharma. That part is pantomime. The fact that they met without him being there was the last nail in the coffin. Although, as long as we're aware, Carl, as we say again, he was completely entitled to be there and he was invited to be there. He didn't show. I do it for you. Says, yeah, I agree. He's a goner down the road, but they don't need any extra drama than needed. Yeah, I mean, that's the other thing, because it was the Uffindell situation last week that then got kind of overtaken by this, which I'm sure Labour's very unhappy about.
Again, these are all such right. Sorry. I just think, yes, this is a backbench MP's employment issue. It is something that needs to be addressed, but just the absolute blowing everything out of all proportion irritates me. Like, I don't feel like this is anything that's worthy of head news day after day and things like that.
Well, I mean, I guess his accusations are pretty out there. I mean, if his accusations were correct. Now, I was talking about someone talking about the gaslighting. My response to that person on the text was something like, well, it's only gaslighting if what he says is true, because at that point we didn't know. If what he says is not true, then it's not gaslighting. Now, I think that was probably one of the reasons for the headlines over the weekend, was because there was still a lot of unanswered questions, which have been answered now, and now it's up to people whether they accept them or not. I mean, I'm more than happy to accept those answers. It feels credible and plausible to me, but that's for people to, I guess, decide for themselves.
The thing is, he said there was another MP that agrees that McNulty? No, that's The Wire. Anyway, that he was a bully, but then nobody else has actually come out and said that. Somebody else said it might be Larissa Wall, but it's actually been, because she did talk about some bullying, I believe, in aspects of. So, but then nobody else has come out to support that, whereas 4 people have come out and said that he was a bullying boss. So
yeah. I guess the thing with that is the Prime Minister addressed that a bit today, and she basically said that was one of the things they weren't happy about, the breach in protocol, was him sharing information that was private, and those messages were included in it. And she said that they specifically haven't gone looking for the person who shared those. They don't have the context to it, but also they were shared and privately, and it's none of their business. Now, whether that's a cop-out, maybe so, because they don't want any more drama around it, or whether that's fair, I don't know. But that's kind of, I'm paraphrasing probably badly, but she basically said that in the press conference today as well.
I mean, everybody's lying all the time too, aren't they? I mean, I'm not like, oh, politicians are all liars. I don't believe that necessarily, but I mean, there's so much covering of your ass and all that sort of stuff that goes on in everybody's daily life all the time. Everybody's fucking lying. So anyway, I'm a little bit cynical, but it seems to me that this man has been caught being a poor boss.
Yeah. Well, we'll see. I I think that it feels like it's being handled correctly at the moment. The people who the group Labour have said it's an employment issue, and they've put that stake in the ground, and they said we're working through it. If it's all horseshit, then that'll come out as well. And I guess now time will tell.
Yeah, and it's all. I mean, you can only go off the information that we have at the time, and it's been spun in a reasonably pleasant direction. Well, not pleasant, but that Labour seems to be coming out of this okay. But who knows what will unveil next week?
You a fan of chocolate?
Yeah, I like chocolate. I'm not like, it's funny. I'm not one of these massive Whittaker's fans. Oh, I do like peanut slabs and almond slabs. Oh, and hokey pokey slabs. I like a slab, basically. But yes, I certainly wouldn't run screaming from a chocolate because it was talking to me in Te Reo Maori.
It is always very funny to me when big, tough right-wing commentators and, people get so triggered by the smallest things. These big, tough, alt-right, right-wing, label yourself however you want, people who call everyone else snowflakes for wanting safe places and that kind of stuff, get so badly triggered at a Maori word, for example. I always find it quite interesting. And you know what I've decided? It feels like it was kind of one person making a lot of noise.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to, I brought those tweets up to kind of share them, but actually if it's one person making a lot of noise, I don't give a fuck.
Yeah.
So when I read the stories, I was like, oh my goodness, racist backlashes, look at all, and it feels like there's 1 or 2 people doing it, but I did want to talk about it still. I was to talk about the
exact same thing, that I feel like Mr. Slater started it all off, and there's like 5,000 comments on this story though, or something on Facebook. There's a lot of comments. So there's more than.
Well, yeah, that's true. But it seems like it felt when I started looking around the internet for comments and like to shape the show, it was like, well, there's one person, and this person, it seems to be everybody is tweeting back at this one person. And I'm like, well, if it's one person, so be it.
Facebook story will tell you that there's 1 or 2 more racists, sadly, than Mr. Whale Blubber.
And let me tell you something. The word racist, some people are going to kind of against that word for this, but I'll explain to you very clearly why If not racist, it's racially charged and motivated in a second after we do this. And it's a very clear and easy rule for people to remember to figure out if something is racially charged or racist or not, right? I'll give you the rule shortly. It's something I figured out whilst talking to David Seymour, ironically. So Whittaker's says about their lovely milk chocolate. I haven't had sugar since like January, so I look at that a little bit.
Longingly. I just had chocolate. It was Whittaker's chocolate. It was mandarin and ginger dark chocolate.
Oh, it's not that I haven't had any sugar, but I haven't anything sweet. Like I'm sure there's sugar in the bread that I eat and that kind of stuff.
Yeah,
right.
yeah.
It says this. This is what Whittaker says about their chocolate. Our hope is that the label contributes to revitalising te reo in New Zealand, and we hope chocolate lovers enjoy a block of miraka. Miraka? Kirimi.
Kidding. I can't remember.
Miraka kirimi. Well, it's a long I, so it'd be E for the I. So I go to be kirimi. Miraka kirimi.
Yeah.
With their friends in whānau, the story goes on, but not everyone was happy to see the sweet treat supporting reo Māori kaupapa. Online haters were quick to offer opinions. I support people learning te reo, but not in this manner.
I know.
It feels like forced mandated injections. Shame on you, Whittakers. We certainly won't be buying your chocolates anymore. And does everything have to be translated into Maori, M-A-R-I?
Yeah.
So let me explain this to people. This sounds a bit arrogant, me saying I will explain it, but I'll give you the rule that I think is a pretty good rule. And I learned it from Mr. Seymour, from David Seymour, who goes on and 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 on about us all being equal under the law when it comes to race, right? The reason that is a racist, if I'm being very generous, I'll say racially charged statement, is because that's the only thing that David Seymour thinks we should be equal under the law in, right? Because every protected class, gender, age, disability, all those things as well, there are rules under the law where privileges are given to those groups, whether it's 65 and you get a pension, whether it's you're in a wheelchair and you get a closer car park. There are rules under the law where we're not treated equally. The reason why what David Seymour is racist/racially charged when he says we need to be equal under the law when it comes to race is because the only thing he says about being equal under the law is about race. So that's the only thing he says. The reason why comments that you're hearing online like this are racially charged or racist is that Whittaker's has done basically a block of chocolate, a series of chocolate, a run of chocolate to celebrate an event, Māori Language Week. If they did a block of chocolate to celebrate Christmas or to celebrate Sir Edmund Hillary or to celebrate any of those other things, you would not hear a peep. You only hear a peep because it's Māori words. That's why it is racially charged or racist, because that's all they complain about.
Well, I mean, yeah, absolutely. But it would have been interesting if they'd done something around like Poye or something like that, people sort of just be like, oh, well, that's fine, which is ridiculous. And I think it would be cool if they just had it on the packet the whole time.
Yeah, whatever.
Like for a week. I'm like, well, why don't you put them in an equal size and have it the whole time or something like that? That would be truly making a statement.
Yeah.
Like Melissa Stokes uses Māori endlessly on television. I think it's great. It started primarily much more in Māori Language Week and with Jack Tame, etc. And now it's just all the time. And they beef it up in Māori Language Week. And I think that's great. That's truly how you make a difference, is when you use it all the time, not just for tokenistic weeks.
I remember the last Māori Language Week. And I have to say, why does New Zealand music get a month and Māori language only get a week? I'm confused by that. But anyway, I'm not saying New Zealand music shouldn't. Maybe what I'm saying is Māori language should. I remember going to McDonald's at the last Māori Language Week, and the salutation they gave out the speaker was in Māori first, and I was like, this is awesome. Why don't they do this all the time? And the thing that perhaps these people who are complaining about a singular Māori word either don't understand or won't accept is the only thing that makes New Zealand unique in the world is the Maori culture. It's the only thing Rugby, racing, and beer you can get in Australia or South Africa. Lots of stuff to do with the Commonwealth you can get in other countries. Migrants you can get in, literally the thing that makes us unique, the things that pulls New Zealand into being New Zealand is actually the Maori culture, because that's nowhere else.
The Cook Islands also has the Cook Islands Maori culture as well. So, because their language is so similar, it was really interesting. Aere mai instead of haere mai and kia rana and stuff like that. So it is very similar. But yes, and we should celebrate that and celebrate bloody diversity. Yes, and enjoy what we have. Yeah. And it just does. And also Māori words, like I was talking to Jennifer Ward Leland about it for my menopause podcast, Showy Ovaries. Had over 10,000 listens now. Thank you very much. About the fact that things like placenta in Māori is whenua, which is also the earth. Yeah. And that the ovaries, I can't remember the word, but it means basket of seeds. It's all these words that have double meanings with agriculture and stuff like that. That's really sort of quite poetic and lovely. So it's like nice to hear about these things as well.
And let me just also put to bed another filthy lie. Oh, bloody Maori language doesn't serve any purpose. It doesn't work. It's not worth it. Two things. One, in New Zealand, it is an unbelievably commercial language. If you're fluent in Te Reo Māori, you're at the top of the list for so many jobs and so many positions. It is a commercial language in this country. Secondly, it's a language of your country. So I often say this about myself, but I will encourage others about this as well. Even if you're like me and you're so white, you're almost pale blue with my Celtic blood in there, Yep. Yeah. I always kind of think that the Māori story is a part of my story, even though that's not part of my bloodline, because I'm of this land. This is my country. That story is a part of this country's story. Ipso facto, it's a part of my story. And if people don't get that now, it's going to be through attrition. They'll disappear eventually, and other people will. So I mean, I didn't want to. After I realized it was kind of one person making a lot of noise, I'm like, that's one person. But you're right. This is a conversation where others do jump on top of. So I still wanted to actually talk about it, because remember the rule. If that's all they ever complain about, then they're racists. Basically,
I love how you're mansplaining, you're white mansplaining what racism is. It's great.
I said that's what I learned. Remember?
Right. Okay. I also think that something's worth celebrating, even though it could be tenuous, but you go to Australia, like, oh my God, like I went to a cultural evening in Australia and they're all dressed in their board shorts and doing the kangaroo hop and shit like that. And Canada is a little better, but not great either. But the thing is, both of those countries have hundreds of indigenous languages between them. So it's very difficult for them to have a specific, language to choose, because there's just so many. So the fact that we have the Māori language, and yes, I know it is a bit of a homogenization of the various dialects that went before, but the fact that we have one that we can embrace as a nation it is actually something that's unique as well, because it's difficult for Australia because they have so many. And the other thing, of course, is that learning a language, it increases neural pathways in your brain from a young age. People that are multilingual have a lot more sort of brain activity around that sort of thing and can pick up things better. So the fact that we have children learning that, it's not actually useless, and it will give them more aptitude for other languages, as well as just speaking it at home too.
Yeah. Yes. Hey, Penny, it's been lovely having you on again. We've got to do this again sometime. We're still working to, let's be honest, to commercialize this thing. And once we do, we have some more budget to get some people to do something with us. But it's always good to have you on. I very much enjoy having you there.
Thanks.
And thanks to Anne Genter. I'm sure she's still watching. She's got nothing else to do with her time. I'm sure she's still watching.
Yeah.
And we will continue to follow the story about Dr. Sharma and the Labour Party, as we will with Sam Uffindell. I had more to share on that yesterday, but yesterday's conversation got caught up in the the Fire and Fury documentary, as we talked about anti-vaxxers and that kind of thing. So we'll see what tomorrow. I think Chewy's coming on tomorrow night, so I think we'll probably pick up on some stuff then. But for now, Penny, I think that's us. Is there anything you want to leave us with? Got any shows coming up or anything that people need to know about?
Yes, I've got a lot coming up, actually. And I will say, once you catch COVID, it is true, you do to have gone through it and come out the other side and be relatively unscathed, it is a big, massive, because you just don't have a fucking clue. But I'm doing Austin Found, there we go. That's my Showy Ovaries podcast, all about menopause. So Austin Found isn't actually on there, but Austin Found is our improvised Jane Austen musical we're doing in the Auckland Fringe, in the Rose Centre in Belmont. Then I'm doing an improvised Real Housewives of Oniroa. The Real Housewives of Oniroa, which is on Waiheke, and that's an improvised soap opera where I'm playing Hilda Burke-Patrick in that one. And then I'm doing Olive Copperbottom in Waiheke at the end of September, in Palmerston North in October, and then in Wellington in November.
It's funny. What's the name of the improv show again?
There is The Real Housewives of Oniroa and also Austin Found.
I was talking to one of my kids the other day about Exfolios that we did.
Oh, wow.
Way back at the New Zealand Comedy Festival, we did a 90-minute Shakespearean improv. So I've seen. Festival? Say again?
I don't remember it being in the Comedy Festival.
Yeah, it was in the New Zealand Comedy Festival. We did that then in the up at the Maidment, the small theatre in the
Maidment Studio.
Yeah, so we were just talking about that the other day. So I think people should definitely get along and check it out. If they want to find out more about you, hotpink.co.nz, is it the best place to go?
Yeah, there, and also the Fringe website if you want to find out about Austin Found. So that's an improvised Jane Austen musical with Laurie, who was in the Exfolios, and I'm working on a Shakespeare show currently. So cool. Sort of doing full circle back to, and also next year is the 400th anniversary of the publishing of the first folio. So that was a happy coincidence for me premiering a show next year. So that could be a good publicity angle as well. Yeah.
All right, Penny, thanks for joining us. Thanks for being on board, guys. I appreciate you being with us tonight, and we will see you tomorrow night from 10 p.m. for another edition of Big Hairy News. Hooroo, everybody.